Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Ordinarily, I would be extremely pleased with all those accomplishments, but I'm very humbled that I don't have a superhero to show. So this is like a very mundane, humane experience. I would also, since this is, in essence, a very tech-centric, although also people-oriented or people-focused conference, and we're here to discuss technology, I'm going to discuss AI. I had one fundamental existential technological question to begin with, which is, could I have a clicker? There we are, thank you. Okay, see, sometimes old technology is still essential, even in the age of algorithms and AI. And what I'd like to do over the next 20 minutes or so is to give you my take, the take that I try to highlight and discuss in my latest book, A Human AI Automation and the Quest to Reclaim What Makes Us Unique, about the human-AI interface. I'm going to focus not so much on machines, but on humans, although trying to scrutinize and highlight some of the main impact points or ways in which AI, the defining technology of today, is impacting our humanity. So I think to begin with, it's important to look at the present or even the past, since nobody has data on the future. And if we look at the past history of humans, we have a long track record of blaming our own technological inventions for our own cultural demise. There's nothing new about this. You can go back all the way to ancient Greece, where Socrates and his fellow philosophers, they were sort of like the original hipsters, or the hipsters of the time. They opposed to the dominant technological invention, a very disruptive invention of the time called writing, because they thought it would ruin our memory. It would atrophy our memory. So famously, Socrates refused to write anything down. People still question whether he existed or not, whether he was, in fact, the original footnote to Plato. But this is where it all starts. Fast forward a few centuries, when the first modern newspapers were invented, and critics actually lamented, they feared that newspapers would kill social gatherings. What's the point of meeting, they said, if there's no gossip or news to exchange? Here we are in a room that is packed, even though we're all glued to our devices. So clearly, the ability to retrieve content or information online or in traditional kind of broadsheets, newspapers, doesn't kill our social instincts. And lastly, and most recently, for the past 100 years, we've been accusing or critiquing all forms of media, from radio to television and then video games and more recently social media, of making us stupid. Okay? So it should come as no surprise, it shouldn't surprise us that the overall sentiment towards AI is largely negative. And of course, anywhere in the world, if you're exposed to business, management, or mainstream discussions of AI, you can see they're very extremist. They're either apocalyptic and they fear the extinctions of humans, or they're dystopian and echo Radiohead's famous songs that technology and AI, generative AI now, is going to make us fitter, happier, more productive. Okay? I'm kind of in the middle, which makes me quite boring. I decided maybe I should start a movement called Radical Nuance, for people who are, you know, very uncertain and, you know, unable to see anything but the good and the bad, the yin and yang of situations. And this is the spirit with which I approach this subject. So AI is largely accused of really making things worse. There are three specific common themes that we usually put forward or see in common narratives that criticize AI. The first, of course, is that AI will kill all jobs or many jobs, creating, as Yuval Harari said in Homo Deus, a useless class of humans. The second is that AI, artificial intelligence, will introduce or is introducing bias to human society. And the third is that AI, especially through the social media platforms that it fuels, is making us humans antisocial. Now, to be fair, these claims are not totally off, but again, a little bit of rational moderation is helpful, can be helpful to not just understand their substance, but find a way forward. I'm with Peter Thiel when he says that actually there's no substantive difference between a pessimist and an optimist. A pessimist thinks, you know, life is over, there's not much you can do, we are helpless, and then it leads to inaction. And an optimist just sits there and hopes for the best, also leading to inaction. I think the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, so I want to take a look at these three claims and see what the substance is that underpins it. So let's start with job elimination. While it is true that AI is making certain jobs obsolete, it mostly automates tasks within jobs, changing the talent or skills constellation that is needed to perform them. So just like an Uber driver doesn't need to know their way around the city, but needs to have a clean car, drive safely, and an interesting conversation. You know, you can rate drivers on their conversation and even their playlist. So a digital marketeer today doesn't need to be good at copywriting or translating, but should be, or hopefully will be, a good prompt engineer. So even when AI actually eliminates entire jobs, it tends to create more jobs in turn. This is what has been happening so far in the last 20, 25 years. The digital revolution saw the extinction of certain jobs, but the creation of many others, which is why talent shortages are a real issue, and talent markets are very, very tight, and you still have a historical relative rates, low unemployment rates, and the number of job vacancies or openings continues to outpace the number of people looking for jobs, okay? The problem, of course, is that if you're displaced from a job by AI or any other technology, you don't automatically have access to the new jobs that are created. So if you were a brick-and-mortar store manager, you cannot automatically become a digital marketeer or an AI ethicist. But on the whole, the net gain in new jobs is what we should expect. And typically, we cannot see it over a short time frame, over 5 or 10 years, right? Famously, in 2013, Oxford economists predicted that by 2023, so today, 80% of the jobs that existed today won't exist now. They were wrong. But if you look at a long time frame, a long-term kind of frame, 65% of the jobs that exist today didn't exist in 1940, right? So you do see more renewal. So my advice to you, if you're in the business of making predictions, or you want to become some kind of prediction guru, always pick a point in time that is at least 50 years into the future, so people will be dead and they won't check if you were right or not. 10 years, very risky. So, but just because humans are likely to remain in the loop, and there's going to be more jobs for us, hopefully, doesn't mean we're going to be more productive. And in fact, a lot of the discussions on productivity are very interesting because they miss one of the critical points, which is the data we have today and of what happens, about what happens so far. So interestingly, productivity should be defined as doing more with less, which actually is also the definition of technology. Technologies are tools to do more with less. If you measure it correctly, it should be measured not as total output, but output divided by input. And if you look at these data, you can see in the first phase or wave of the digital revolution, productivity went up as we leverage or reap the benefits of personal computers and the internets and all the apps, only to stagnate after that with the rise of social media in 2008, right? So you can look at data. I talk extensively about this in my latest book. 60 to 85% of smartphone use occurs during working hours, whether you're in the office or working from anywhere. 70% of workers report to being distracted. In the US alone, this accounts for $650 billion in productivity loss each year, which is about 15 times higher than the loss due to absenteeism, illness, and well-being issues, which of course are a big issue. And multitasking, which we all do, deducts the equivalent of 10 IQ points from your performance, right? So there are lots of studies done on this, going back to the 70s. When you are task switching and you're focusing on something, you're interrupted, and then you go back, you lose, on average, 25 minutes of focus and concentration from the task you were working on before, right? So it's about as debilitating as smoking weed, marijuana. If you do both at the same time, that's probably more than 20 points that you lose. And obviously, minus the benefits, right? Because there are also studies documenting creativity boosts or improvements with marijuana and other substances, not so from multitasking, okay? So the average human today is expected to spend or waste between 7 or 8 years of their lifetime on their phones, on their screens, most of it on social media. And so, you know, the reality is that our clients, bosses, colleagues, friends, spouses, children, and pets are all competing for our attention, but AI is winning. AI is winning. In the early days of the pandemic, when offices shut and people were sent to work from home, one of my clients cynically remarked, but without the office, how will I pretend to work? Right? And it's true that when you're in an office, you spend a lot of time engaged in the performative elements of job performance, which is why managers like people in the office, because when they walk around, they see them, they look busy, which makes them think that they're good bosses, right? Hybrid work is a wonderful idea. Who doesn't want more freedom and flexibility? Although it's true that there is a loss or, you know, a wound to culture, it is possible to nurture and drive forward the evolution of a culture even when people are switching between home and the office. But the reality is that opportunities to get distracted are actually much higher now at home than at the office. And I'm not talking about children or pets, I'm talking about digital distractions. So it seems that even if AI and other technologies can improve productivity, sometimes we're more productive if we ignore rather than use technology. What about bias? So this is another issue. So the fact or the claim that AI is introducing bias to human society. Okay. So, well, on the one hand, you know, this shouldn't surprise us, since AI is fueled with data that in essence comes from human preferences, human behaviors, and human judgments. It can only be as objective as humans are, which basically means not objective at all, right? Humans are biased by design. Our brains are systematically and structurally biased. If you show me an unbiased human, I will tell you they're not a human. And no amount of unconscious bias training could erase categories that are instilled enough from a very, very early age. That said, it is possible to design AI that is less biased than humans. In fact, one of the complaints that I hear about generative AI, ChatGPT for example, is that with all the guardrails that it has, it's so politically correct, it sits on the fence so much that actually it produces no meaningful or accurate insights, right? Which is quite interesting. So, you know, ChatGPT is a little bit like the BBC in the sense that people on the left accuse it of being right, people on the right accuse it of being woke. Maybe this is the highest bar for objectivity in human affairs, is to make everybody equally unhappy, right? Because we love our biases, so when we don't see them represented or exposed, especially in digital channels, we feel territorial and we feel that information is wrong, right? Interestingly, although there's plenty of examples of algorithms breaking bad or AI going rogue, actually, mostly they do more to expose and highlight biases that exist in a system than create or introduce new biases. And let's be perfectly clear on one issue. Human beings have a wonderful track record perfecting and refining their biases for centuries or millennia without the help of any technology, AI or otherwise. And of course, AI can never be biased in the human way. AI is incapable of replicating human biases. Algorithms, you know, even if they continue to evolve, won't have a fragile self-esteem that they need to protect by bringing other people or AI down. I mean, that would be kind of like a neurotic version of AI, which could be interesting only if you're a psychologist. So Examples where AI uses or attempts to use AI backfired. For example, when companies have tried to train a chatbot to predict who gets promoted in a certain system organization. And the chatbot recommends a surplus of middle-aged white male engineers. And then companies say, okay, we're not going to use this system because it's biased. Well, let me tell you something. Middle-aged white male engineers will continue to get promoted in those cultures, even if you don't use AI. Okay? Equally, when Google or other companies introduces guardrails to censor sexist comments or what people are saying about a certain topic because they believe it's pro-social to do so and congruent to their with their values, it doesn't eliminate sexism or racism from society, only from their internet browser, which is a famous case, so 10 years ago, even the UN reported on this in its study and report on gender equality, that the internet and AI pose the risk of introducing sexist bias in society, because if you go to Google and put things like women are, you see all these sexist comments. Well, now you don't see them, which doesn't mean that people have stopped being sexist, right? So guardrails might simultaneously indicate or highlight that it is possible to design AI that is less biased than humans, but that we won't like that AI because we want AI that matches our biases. Technically, it will be very easy to tweak or reprogram any AI, generative or otherwise, to actually make us more open-minded. Think of it as not open AI, but open-minded AI, right? So imagine if we reprogram all of the AIs that infiltrate or nudge you on Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, Twitter, or X, as it's called now, LinkedIn, maybe even Tinder, to recommend you not the stuff you really want, but the stuff you should consider to become more open-minded. So in essence, stuff you really don't like. I mean, I can tell you, it would lead to the massive exodus away from those platforms and onto the new thing that actually protects and nurtures and harnesses our digital echo chamber and our filter bubble. You can see this very clearly in politics, right? Even in the infamous case study of Cambridge Analytica, of using AI and algorithms to influence elections, whether it's the US election or the Brexit referendum. What's interesting about this project is that, just like traditional advertisers, they didn't want to waste ads. Fake news ads are still expensive to produce, on irrelevant voters. So they wanted to target the people that were, in their own words, persuadable. That's the term they use. And the persuadables included basically only 15% of voters in every country where they did it. Meaning 85% of voters are beyond persuasion, right? Beyond persuasion. Same when you introduce fact-checking AI in political debates. They do very little to change voting intentions. It doesn't matter how many times we flag that politicians are lying or not. It doesn't matter, people don't change. So what about the claim that AI is making us more antisocial? Well, this one, there's definitely some truth and substance to it. In fact, it's unfair to blame AI for making us narcissistic, since if we hadn't been quite self-obsessed and narcissistic to begin with, we wouldn't even have social media in the first place, or the AI algorithms that inhabit it. But it is also true that AI has normalized narcissism, or at least digital narcissism, in the sense of worshipping and positively rewarding self-promotion, self-centeredness, and entitlement, right? There's still actually a difference between the analog and the digital world here. So in the normal, real, or analog world, for example, if you go around the office telling everybody how amazing you are, and what a great weekend you had, and that you got upgraded into the business class lounge, and that you're fantastic, talking all the time and not listening, and of course telling everybody what your cat had for breakfast, you're probably going to be deemed quite obnoxious and unlikable. I think this is quite culturally universal. But in the digital realm, if you do this, AI will make you an influencer. You'll have lots of followers and, yes. So the normalization of narcissism is all over the web and also permeates cultural narcissism, which we know has been increasing for about 60 or 70 years. There's lots of studies that actually use clinical measures of narcissism. So in the 1930s, if you ask people, are you destined to be famous? Only 20 or 30% of people said yes. In the 1950s, that increased to 40%. In the 80s, it was 60%. Now it's 85% of people in their 20s answer yes to the question, I am destined to be famous. So before we used to critique millennials, now it's Gen Z, but this trend is only going upwards, which is why even if you look at role models, they seem more narcissistic all the time, right? When we look at Muhammad Ali, he seems quite charming in the way he brags and uses overconfident. Marilyn Monroe seems very modest by today's standards. Even Paris Hilton, who was the mentor of Kim Kardashian, so 10 out of 10 in mentorship, seems quite low-key and discreet compared to Kim Kardashian. So continue this trend and imagine in 50 years' time when civilization looks back at Kim and Kanye and say, why weren't they modest? Weren't they humble, right? If inflation continues to go that way. So I think AI co-opts our narcissistic and self-important motives. And interestingly, even generative AI, which is designed to mirror or mimic human behaviors or tendencies, behaves at times like an insecure narcissist. Right? You can go and ask it something, and most of the time, if you're asking something meaningful or interesting or important, the answer will be, well, you know, I'm just a large language model, so I don't know. I'm not in a position to tell you. My training data only goes back to 2021, but I will still tell you, even though I know nothing about this subject, and hopefully you will like me. Right? So it's higher on confidence than competence, which maybe is why this tool or system, which has, I think, rightly been described as mansplaining as a service, is so offensive and so daunting to us, because we see that for the first time, something that was an inherently and uniquely human ability or skill, namely to bullshit, is now reproduced by AI. We call it hallucinating is the polite term. But AI technology can bullshit just like humans. What's left for us to do? So it seems that as we look at ourselves through the lens of AI, there is an interesting but not widely acknowledged trend that the more AI becomes like us, or the more human-like AI becomes, the less we like it. Maybe because we don't like what we see when we look at ourselves in the mirror through the image that we see reflected in AI. But I think that should also be a great call to action, to change and to become a better version of ourselves and try to work on the qualities that we are not proud of. And I see three big opportunities for us in the AI age if we want to ensure that the AI age is also the human age, or the human AI age. The first is to harness the skills that AI will probably not master. I say probably because, you know, this changes by the month or by the week. So, for instance, not so long ago, most people would agree with the fact that AI cannot do empathy or EQ. There was a very interesting recent study done in US hospitals where half of the doctors outsourced patient communication to generative AI, and patient satisfaction went up by 40%. And patients felt that the doctors were suddenly more empathetic. They were just talking to a machine. Okay? So also, when people talk about the limits of AI and tell me that, well, you know, AI cannot really display, even generative AI, ChatGPT-4 cannot really display things like self-awareness, creativity, sense of humor, etc. My answer is, well, there's not much evidence that the average human is displaying a lot of these things in their typical working day. We can and should, but we need to get our act together and exercise some self-control. Equally, AI has already disrupted expertise, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be building deeper and more meaningful expertise. So expertise is changing. It has changed already. It used to be about knowing all the answers. Now it's about asking the right questions. It used to be about trying to retrieve and memorize and then, you know, express facts. Now it's about vetting facts and working out what to do with the insights that you have. Because even if AI will win the IQ battle, it is still up to us to make smart or dumb decisions as we use this tool. So, you know, I think a good analogy to make sense of generative AI vis-a-vis expertise and knowledge is that generative AI is a little bit like the intellectual equivalent to fast food. It can give you a rapid, free or cheap, quite addictive, but not very nutritious, kind of nourishing for your hungry mind. But I think there's also an opportunity for us to then create the intellectual equivalent of the farm-to-table or slow food movement, right? It's a pity that concepts like deep learning are associated with machines rather than humans, when it has always been a human virtue. And finally, I think it's important, very helpful, to abandon double standards when we judge technologies. This is one I'm preaching to the audience here, I'm sure, or to the choir, because the immediate or instant goal with AI and any technology is not perfection, but incremental improvements over the status quo. So the goal really is to find better ways of being wrong incrementally. This is like when one self-driving car crashes and people are shocked and scandalized and say, we will never have self-driving cars, they're a disaster and they're a threat to humanity, but simultaneously they're very happy with 1.3 million people dying each year courtesy of human drivers, okay? So think about the equivalent for any area, including HR, leadership development, coaching, assessment, recruitment, etc. The goal with AI, the objective, is not perfection, but better than the status quo, which is often a very low bar. Here's where my optimism and my pessimism, collide. Thank you very much.